This is Political Communication, and I'm your professor, Dr. Patrick Stewart. In this lesson, we focus on journalistic aggression as carried out through interruptions. Interruptions happen most often during interactions between individual journalists and public figures when one or the other wants to get their point across, so much so that they take the other's speaking turn. This rhetorical strategy is an omnipresent part of life, but is especially obvious in politics when social politeness breaks down between public officials and journalists. As we know well by now, conversational analysis looks for systematic patterns of social interactions that indicate practices by design. Interruptions qualify as they are, in the words of Stephen Clayman and his colleagues, recurrent, contextually situated, and attract responses that discriminate them from related or similar practices. Perhaps more to the point, interruptions, both successful and unsuccessful, are individual actions that produce patterns action by action, move by move, and provide us information about an institutional entity by how they are carried out and responded to. As a result, we focus on this through microanalysis, considering the finer details of social interactions through analysis of film, audio tape, and videotape recordings, as seen in broadcast interviews, political speeches, press conferences, and debates. A major means of understanding conversational behavior is to consider to what end behavior is being used. In other words, we all want to have influence over other people. The question is, how? Do we want to try to control other people through aggressive behavior, or do we try to more subtly influence them through affiliative behavior? The human ethological approach, which builds on animal ethology, suggests that understanding social, which are most definitely political, interactions, involves observing behavior. Human ethology has found that two major types of socio-political behavior occur when people converse with each other. Affiliative behavior occurs when questions are asked, or when interjections that support the conversation are used to elicit response from the other person or persons involved with the discussion. Likewise, laughter, with its contagious and positive emotional effect on others, and a speaker using first-person plural, both bring people together, albeit in different and subtle manners. There is also dominance behavior, in which people attempt to assert control by taking up more speaking time and speaking turns, use louder voices to be heard further away and drown out other people's voices, make assertions that are not necessarily supported, use the first person singular, and ridicule others. For our purposes, we consider interruptions, which is when an individual talks over other people. Whenever we have a discussion, we engage in turn-taking by sharing bouts of talking and listening. What makes journalistic encounters with public figures different is that these turn-taking encounters use mostly a question-answer format. Journalists asking questions and the public figure answers them. The question is, how do discussion partners coordinate their activity? The first thing to consider is that of turn-yielding indicators. These indicators include nonverbal signals such as the rise or fall of pitch at the end of a clause, a drawl on the final syllable, the termination of a hand gesture that signals the end of a statement, or a drop in pitch or loudness. Turn-yielding indicators can also include such things as completion of a grammatical clause and stereotyped expressions. Ultimately, all turn-taking is shaped by the contextual expectations where discussions happen. Press conference interviews where a public figure stands and takes questions from multiple seated journalists competing for attention is very different from a one-on-one interview in which both participants are sitting in comfortable chairs and having a chat about the issues of the day. We can conclude that interviews, political debates, solo press conferences, and joint press conferences have specific norms that both public figures and journalists operate within. These govern turn-taking interactions. The structure of these different types of meeting grounds affects turn-taking interactions and how journalists, through their journalistic aggression, and public figures, through their political equivocation, interact. In summary, journalists and public figures operate using different rules regarding turn-taking interactions. Thus, context makes a difference in what is considered appropriate and what is perceived as impolite. One of my PhD mentors, and later my colleague and co-author, Jim Schubert, carried out extensive ethological research where he watched the behavior of city council members. He found that during city council meetings, interruptions are a form of competitive behavior. In conjunction with other forms of dominance behaviors we have discussed, interruptions allow for dominant individuals to displace subordinates or win competitions over other dominant individuals. As he points out in discussion of observing small groups, in open political debate, interruptions define a context in which two or more people simultaneously compete for access to the group's consciousness. Experiments suggest interrupters gain status at the expense of those being interrupted, with interrupters seen as more competent, dominant, and influential when compared to the interrupted. Cross-culturally, context likewise plays a role in how public figures use interruptions, as well as claims that one was unjustly interrupted, to get their point across while establishing dominance. Peter Bull noted how the United Kingdom's Prime Minister from 1979 to 1990, Margaret Thatcher, used her interpersonal skill set, including interruptions and claims she was unjustly interrupted, rather effectively, stating, "Margaret Thatcher showed a striking mastery of the arts of political one-upsmanship. She continually wrong-footed her interviewers and put them on the defenses, such that they felt obliged to justify and apologize for their role as interviewers." However, Bull found that upon further analysis, there was no significant difference between two major political leaders in Britain that he analyzed, Margaret Thatcher and Neil Kinnock, in their interruption behavior. What happened is that Thatcher objected to interruptions more frequently and personalized the issues to her benefit. In other words, when one microanalyzes behavior, claims of unfairness and actual unfairness might not match up with the reality of social interactions. Even elaborated political set pieces provide insights regarding how interruptions can carry the day. Almost a decade ago, my then honors student Chris Kimmel carried out a senior thesis about Supreme Court oral argument, focusing on interruption behavior. He considered whether the likelihood of a party winning a case can be inferred by examining the verbal and nonverbal behavior of the justices during oral argument, whereas both sides of a case have 30 minutes to argue their position. What he found is that interruptions can be used to predict Supreme Court justice votes in close cases. But while this held true for the entire Supreme Court, it varied by justice. Chris found that Justices Roberts, Ginsburg, Sotomayor, Stevens, Alito, and Breyer exhibited behavior as predicted, suggesting that the likelihood of a party winning a case can indeed be predicted by examining their behavior during oral arguments. On the other hand, Justices Kennedy, Scalia, and Thomas did not seem systematically to indicate their vote through numbers of interruptions. Thomas did not ask any questions at all, and Scalia was the justice who asked the most questions of everyone on the court. In conclusion, paying attention to interruptions in a microanalytic manner matters when it comes to understanding public figures and the strategies they use. But caution should be taken when drawing conclusions about individuals and their behavior.